It's a great pleasure to welcome two ex-Newcastle University graduates. Tony Willmott, senior archaeologist at Historic England, who started digging at the age of 16, 1972, and after graduation, 1977, has been professional field archaeologist ever since. He's worked for English Heritage, which became Historic England, for 37 years. He has directed many excavations on Roman and early medieval sites, notably at Birdoswald since 1987, as well as on many other sites on Hadrian's Wall. Plus the amphitheatres at Chester and Richborough, and work at Maryport and Whitby Abbey. He's published widely on these works and on other subjects, and the word is that he's due to retire in 2025. Professor Ian Haynes began his fieldwork career in 1986, again an undergraduate at Newcastle, and he's undertaken archaeological projects in 6 countries, working mainly, though not exclusively, on Roman themes. He is, as well as Professor of Archaeology at Newcastle University, also the Chair of Archaeology at the British School of Rome, the UK's largest overseas research institute. He's currently the principal investigator for Rome Transformed, a major interdisciplinary and ERC-funded project. And on Britain's Roman frontier, he's directed geophysical surveys at Beckford and Corbridge and co-directed 2 5-season projects at Birdoswald and Maryport. It's a great pleasure to welcome first Tony and then Ian.
Thank you, David. Well, this is going to be the well-known Willmott Haynes double act. We will alternate so that you don't get the same voice all night, and I'm going to be kicking off. The lecture marks the end, or the end was in July, of our supposedly 5-year season on the extramural settlements at Birdoswald. It was supposed to be on the extramural settlements. Discovering the bathhouse was a bit of a bonus. But I'm going to go back a little bit over work at Birdoswald, mostly work directed by myself, and I'm going to be a bit cheeky and insert a few new discoveries during the post-excavation process, so do bear with me while I do that. Most of you will know where Birdoswald is. Use this pointer thing here. It's located just there in the centre of the line of Hadrian's Wall, more or less, on the River Irthing, and at the beginning of the stretch of Hadrian's Wall, where the line of the turf wall and the line of the stone wall along the road there, sorry, that's for the camera, take different routes. So you've got 2 lines of Hadrian's Wall at Birdoswald. I'm not going to go into that in any detail. Many of you will know all about it. Most of the excavation at Birdoswald has been carried on within the walls of the fort. Famously, in 1929, the area here was excavated by Simpson and Richmond with Eric Burley, and that was the first stratigraphic excavation within the walls of the fort, and was the basis for the long-lived idea of 4 wall periods: Hadrianic, Severian, Constantinian, and Theodosian. That was the 1929 work. And that was a culmination of years of trenching to find the route of the turf wall, the route of the vallum, how the turf wall, the vallum, the fort, and the various other parts of the Hadrian's Wall complex fitted together. My own work started in 1987 to 92, and that was in the area immediately in front of Birdoswald Farmhouse. This purple area here was the 87 to 92 work, and that revealed the granaries, the principal granaries of the fort, here and here, these 2 buildings here, and the principal west gate. Buildings alongside the main road, the Via Principalis here, and buildings also underneath the farmhouse and the farm buildings. In 1999, hang on, what are the dates? Check. 97 to 98, excavation in preparation for the creation of the current visitor centre underneath the floors of the buildings and underneath the farmyards of the buildings meant that we were able to show the phasing and the and dating of the whole of this western side of the praetentura of the fort. So we have the 1929 excavation down here. This is the Hadrianic phase, this the Severan phase. The 1929 excavations there, geophysical survey shows these barrack blocks here, and the barrack blocks here we excavated 87 to 98, and the big basilica exercitoria, this exercise and drill basilica, was discovered underneath the farmhouse when the toilets were renovated in 1988. That's another story. So we now have 21% of the fort interior excavated, understood, analysed and published, importantly. But what we really didn't know was what went on outside the walls of the fort on that complex. As I said, Simpson, Richmond, Burley were looking for the relationships between the various elements of Hadrian's Wall, and that started with Haverfield, who discovered the turf wall at Appletree in 1896, and this was his work on the site. Again, these are trenches tracing the course of the turf wall ditch, the vallum, and so forth. What he did find in the field called Chapel Field here was a stone-founded building. What it was, we don't know. Chapel Field, it's an interesting term. It's a stone building there. Was it a Roman stone building? Was it a medieval or post-medieval field barn or other building? We just don't know. It's never been looked at since Haverfield. Other works which had taken place outside the fort in the past were the evaluation of the spur end down here to the south of the fort in 1996 in response to the threat of cliff erosion into the River Irthing there below. Time team came and did a small evaluation in the area of the in the western area of the extramural settlement in 1999, and they also followed up with a small piece of work in the Fort Cemetery in 1999. The Fort Cemetery, again, subject to erosion, was excavated more thoroughly, and I'll come to that in a minute, in 2009. What really changed things in our understanding of Birdoswald was the extensive geophysical survey that was conducted by Alan Biggins and David Taylor in 1999 and published in 2 articles in Britannia. And they demonstrated for the first time that the extramural settlement outside the fort was very, very extensive indeed. Indeed, both to west and east, areas of building, areas of development, which were each as big in area as the fort itself. And this was the first of these major surveys that Biggins and Taylor did. The most famous one, I suppose, and that famous image of the famous image of the Maryport survey that they did more or less at the same time. And it was really in response to this survey that Time Team came along in 2000 and did these 2 little evaluations. You see, just about see Phil Harding there with his hat on, standing with his hands in his pockets alongside the trench. The excavation in the cemetery produced 1 burial deposit, 1 cremation deposit, consisting of an urn, an auxiliary vessel, and some little decorated bone fragments, part of funerary furniture. And these were third century in date, very much like the 3rd century material from Broome, of course, also in Cumbria. In terms of the cemetery, 2009 saw, bottom slide there, major catastrophic cliff collapse. Knowing that the cemetery was under immediate threat, meant that in 2009 we went back and did a mitigation exercise, excavating a whole area on the edge of the cliff, running 15 metres back from the cliff itself. So, and excavating it completely, doing total excavation of every archaeological deposit there, which of course meant that it can go back another 15 metres before anyone has to go and do the same thing again. What that excavation produced were a wide variety, 61 cremation deposits, but a wide range of types. We had just simple pit with cremation debris in it, a kist there with a pot in the bottom and some cremated bone there. Burial in urns, only a very few of those. A wooden box defined by the nails that had held it together. A little sort of simple pit defined by a kist, and bust-and burial as well. This one here, a rectangular pit. The pyre would have been constructed above it. The little flags around there, each one marks a little stake hole, which would be the framework of the pyre, which would be built above the pit, so that when the cremation took place, the whole lot fell in. The analysis work is well underway, and the final publication will be in spring. Sorry, it won't be a Christmas present, but it will be in spring. But the final analysis came up with quite a lot of interesting stuff. We threw a lot of cutting-edge science at it. And just to look at two deposits, this one was a deposit of whole carbonised fruits and nuts, including fig and date, plum, walnut, cherry, and grapes. But these are whole fruits, which are carbonised and are recognisable. They look prettier like that. Now, the cherries, the walnuts, and the plums, and possibly the grapes might be British products, but the dates and the figs would certainly have to be imported as dried fruits from the Mediterranean and from North Africa. The second one I want to go into, and this one in some detail, is this one. And this was a deposit of two intercutting urn burials. You can see that they were intercutting just there. The first one cut by the second one. Now the first one had the remains of a child of about 5 years old in it, the cremated bones of a child of about 5. The second one, which cut into it and was very close to it, close enough almost to touch, was a young adult female of about 30 years old. That's a part of her cremated remains there. That's the greater sciatic notch, which is absolutely indicative of a female. But this particular pot also contained ring mail, a small piece of ring mail with artifacts sort of fastened onto it or wired onto it. And you see that from the X-ray. We X-rayed it, we CT scanned it, we excavated it in the laboratory. And CT scans showed all kinds of objects, little bronze ring there. This drawing was all we could do, because we can't take that deposit apart. It is all rusted together with the ring mail. And these are sort of objects around it. And it took me a long time to find parallels to female burial with ring mail in a pot. And the only place where that happens is in the Birdoswald culture of central Poland. And you can see the similarity of these two deposits from the Opatov cemetery within the Birdoswald culture. So we have here someone who is almost certainly from that area of Central Europe, who dies and is buried at Birdoswald next to a child burial, so close that we for long thought a mother and child relationship took place. Sorry, this is a written slide. I don't usually do this, but it's complicated. Strontium isotope analysis. For the child, had a tooth root representing the first year of life, had a comparable isotopic value to its bone, but the strontium value of this bone was 2 standard deviations lower than the site mean. We did a lot of strontium analysis on the bone. This suggested that the child had arrived at the site from elsewhere, presumably with its family, not long before death. The female, the second burial, buried after the child, the hole containing the pot cut that of the child's grave, allowing the 2 vessels to almost touch. As I said, contained the remains of a young adult female. The survival of differential survival of different kinds of bone allowed isotopic analysis to determine that she'd moved from a more to a less radiogenic environment approximately 5 years prior to death, and the close juxtaposition of the deposit which suggested a mother buried close to a predeceased child. Comparison of the results of the child's cortical bone and the women's trabecular bone give identical isotopic results. And Christoph Snurk, a gentleman who did the isotope analysis, stated, given that this should reflect diet over the last 5 years of the woman's life and the child was approximately 5 years old, the results are consistent with a mother and child relationship, which is really nice and something that's astonishing that you can get from isotope analysis. We mentioned before the geophysical survey. This is the geophysical survey again, showing the areas of different sort of occupation to east and west of the fort. And with that, I shall give way to the younger man.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tony. So, we now come up to how we build on that legacy of research. We have a case where we have a site that is exceptionally well known. We know where the cemetery is, as you've just seen. We've also got the legacy of the work that took place in the fort. How do we actually understand the entirety of this settlement? The geophysics, as Tony has indicated, is an essential part of that equation. I'm having to switch between 2 different types of pointers here for our friends at home as well. So what we did was we looked at the geophysics, we looked at our other clues, and we noted a series of target areas. Over here, because we've got a great deal of complexity, more of which Tony will speak about, but it clearly had significance to answer various questions. Over here, this became Area B, Trench B, where we could characterise better examples of housing in the extramural settlement. Area C, where we took a sneaky peek at a big question about the nature of the defences of Hadrian's Wall. Area D, which was perhaps in some ways a surprising decision for some because it is an area that is not normally excavated, but the geophysics of Biggins and Taylor had suggested there was rather more going on here that needed to have a look at. And Area E, another opportunity to characterise houses outside the fort, but also to explore this rather interesting space emerging in the geophysics and potentially indicating another kind of focal point within the settlement. So very briefly, that is a summary of where we put our trenches related to the position of the fort. And this shows where our trenches were in relation to the work that had done before. So you can see how we're very much seeing the work that we're doing here as an extension of the work that has gone before. Further geophysical survey followed, and of course the work of Biggins and Taylor was exemplary, not only for its time, but of enduring value. It is notable that our own geophysics, in this case we're looking at magnetometry, didn't show anything radically different from what had been found in the earlier survey. We did take the interpretation further forward, and I can develop on that later, because it demonstrates various very different treatments of the site after the Roman period as well. But from putting all this evidence together, we were able to better appraise where our target should be. And at that stage, it was a pleasure to be joined by a fantastic group of colleagues and I'm delighted to see so many of you here. I did think of asking you to do a human wave, actually, but that might upset the lecture theatre. Only a few of the groups who served on the project are here. There were, in fact, 10 separate cohorts. And I'd just like, as I know Tony would, to thank you all. This is your story every bit as much as it is ours, so thank you all. Let's start off with some of our early adventures. I'm skipping area A for the moment because Tony will come back to that and talk in more detail about the bathhouse and the engineering, and go to B and indeed to C. I'll take C first, just to take that interesting question about the wall and its defences out of our overall equation here, because it is extremely important to note that there have been repeated observations of obstacle pits on the berm of Hadrian's Wall, that is the space between the curtain wall and the north of the ditch to the north, and those have overwhelmingly been discoveries on the eastern end of Hadrian's Wall. So this was an opportunity within our research framework to look at what was going on in the central sector, and one very brave and inspiring team did this. And I think it's fair to say that their morale remained very high, despite the fact that they found relatively little, which was tremendously important for the rest of us, but possibly not quite what they thought they'd signed up to do. We'll come back to that point of detail and its significance for the interpretation later on. Trench B, though, got off to a fine pace, and I should properly have a picture from Ben's period of supervision, but you can see there Ellie in the Kingdom in 22, I think that was, and the results of the work of the fine teams that were there. What is especially interesting here is not that we've got what we would call a strip house, so a long, thin house that is actually connecting with the road leading in this case, to the east gate of the fort. But fascinatingly, we also see something of the changing dynamic of fort to extramural settlement. And it is well known that at many sites on Hadrian's Wall, we have this feature of the blocking of gates, and we have that here at Birdoswald. But in this case, we can also see what happens to the housing after fort gates are blocked. So one of the two gate portals is blocked, and when that happens, what we end up with is an extension of the property to actually encompass the change in the road, so that the building is brought up to the narrowed road itself. An interesting example of dynamism there, and you can see the east gate, and that trench B lies beyond it. So examples of gate blocking, well attested at Birdoswald. This is the first opportunity to look beyond those. Now, I mentioned earlier on that perhaps people might not in the past have necessarily thought of excavating to the north of the fort in quite the way we did. We're going beyond the line of Hadrian's Wall itself, and we were lured there really by the tantalising interpretations of Biggins and Taylor in their geophysics. Now, in this case, we were not able to identify anything that neatly correlated with the apparent archaeological anomalies discovered by them, but we're grateful to them because we were able to see quite a lot of interest at Trench D. Now, this slightly peculiar shape does indeed look rather like a trench dug by a committee or designed by a committee initially. It was a series of decisions, but very fruitfully then led forward under the inspiring leadership of Karen Newman. And it also ended up having an extremely important story when set against the rest of the site, because this area was the one that actually yielded the largest number of finds and the greatest variety of ceramic forms. And I'll come back to finds and forms later on, but I would note especially this marvellous intaglio inset in a silver ring, a superb reward for the team working on the site. It changed over time, the shape of this. It became something of a star attraction, as you can see, and it was in the subtle handling of the archaeology here that we were able to picture something rather more meaningful and sophisticated than an initial glance at the site might suggest, because what we can see here is a very subtle pattern of organising of space, testifying to active works north of the wall. Trench E was the latest addition to the team. It looked rather like we were trying to build our own chariot racing circus, actually, from a distance. You can see something of its relationship to the fort there in the mid-centre. And this was, as I mentioned earlier on, our opportunity to ask questions not only about the development to the western side of the fort, but also to consider this strange opening that appeared in the geophysics. What was going on here? At the northern end of the trench, therefore closest to the wall, we could see traces of strip houses. There's a lot of evidence here for something that's found across many of these areas. It was also found in trenches D, it was also found in trench B. This is indications of light, one hesitates to say industrial production, but sometimes we're seeing indications of perhaps metalworking, some kind of production activity. And these are multi-purpose strip houses. They're familiar style overall. If we go, though, to the southern end of the trench, we have rather different structure emerging. And here we can see a team actually involved in the arduous task of basically bringing back this surface and looking here now, not at the big stone structures that you see characterising the strip houses of the north, and indeed trenches to the east, but a large timber frame structure. It was also an area that was associated, and now I'm switching the viewing angle here, it was associated with strange stone spaces, and I was something of an enthusiast of the possibility that we had an overflow of the cemetery initially when these came up, and wiser colleagues suggested that this was not necessarily the only explanation, and indeed so it proved. What we're looking at here are features that seem to be some kind of oven-type structures. Now, the combination is really rather fascinating when you look at this overview of the trench. What you can see, to reiterate, are the strip houses down here, the trace of the Roman road here. You can see how wide this space is. Now, some of this has been severely truncated and damaged in later activity, and then a very different kind of building here with these oven-type structures. What becomes more interesting to me, certainly, is then when we put this into the wider context of the Biggins and Taylor geophysics with some of our own supplements added on. So we wanted to see a little bit more of what's actually going on further west, even than Biggins and Taylor did. So our long-suffering colleague, Alex Turner, kindly took the radiometer over and further extended our geophysics coverage and found relatively little. In fact, in a somewhat harsh and difficult environment, nonetheless found relatively little. So we really are on the edges here of the built-up area of the settlement. The cemetery, I would note, lies to the south of this area, but in terms of lived space, we're on the edges of it. So that cluster with the timber frame structure and the ovens by the road seems to be quite close to the western proximity, western periphery of the settlement, which might be an indication that perhaps it's serving passing footfall as people make their journey further to the west. As you see from the interpretation, not a great deal of discernible structural evidence there. Let me now pass back to Tony to look at Trench A and Baths and Engineering.
Thank you, Ian. Trench A was located in part to examine a structure which had been found by Ian Richmond in 1930. He'd been, as I said, casting around for the relationship between the various facets of Hadrian's Wall, and he came upon, like Haverfield came upon that building in Chapel Field, he came upon a square building with walls 3 foot thick, 20 feet square, with surviving 13 courses of height, which is about 2 meters, just under 2 meters. We incorporated thank goodness for his excellent surveying, we were able to incorporate his building into our Area A. And here is, there at the bottom, of the slide, is the initial opening up of Richmond's building, which looks square, doesn't it? In 2021, this was Richmond's building, as you see, not square, but rectangular, disappearing off into the western section there, but also other structures, other nice buildings with beautiful flagstone floors, this semi-upsidal thing. I'm not going to go into the sequence of these, the whole sequence of these other buildings, which are not part of Richmond's original building. But one of the things that we found in that first season, 2021, was really exciting, is marked there, line of water pipes. How did we know these are line of water pipes? We're talking about Roman water mains here, because we were finding these things. Little iron rings set on edge in shallow trenches, narrow trenches, which are water pipe connectors for lengths of wooden water pipe. Unfortunately, I was in the Saalburg Museum in Germany 2 weeks ago, and there they had this exhibition of a piece of bored water pipe with the original iron rings in it, and you can see on our conservation images the mineral preserved wood grain on our water pipe connectors. So what's all that about? We've got this curious business, we've got these buildings, and we've got a water main. So we carry on in Richmond's building, as I'll carry on calling it, in 2022. We're going down further. At this point, we've excavated the whole of Richmond's trench, which was within the building here. It is indeed 13 courses deep. Actually turned out to be 14 in the end. Why Richmond didn't continue with this building was because he was inundated with water, massive inundation of water, which his pumps couldn't cope with. But also, in 2022, in this little corner, we found that there was a hypocaust. So, little hypocaust here, some hypocaust pili, a box flue tile, and also, this was found in 2021, a stone bench support here, sitting on its edge, exactly like the stone bench supports in the bathhouse at Bear's Den on the Antiline wall, and exactly like the stone bench support that you can just see at Chester's underneath those nice arches in the changing room at the bathhouse there. So carrying on down, moving a lot of stuff in 2022. 2023, this is where we realised what we'd got. We could see that we had here the stoking chamber of a bathhouse, of a heated building, the flue running through to the hypocaust beyond. So this would be where the boiler was situated. I'll come to that in a minute. Within the building, ash rakeback, thick deposits of ash which had been raked back from the flue during the firing of the building, and outside here, 1/2 metre depth of ash and charcoal, which had been presumably raked back, taken through that door and then dumped outside against the side of the building. There's no pretense at tidiness going on here at all. 2024, of course, was the season that paid for everything, because in 2024 we got to the base of the stoking chamber here, and we sympathised with Richmond, because actually before we went out on site in 2024, a colleague and myself, Bruce Bennison and myself, had been pumping the site out, pumping the water out every week from the beginning of April up to when we started in June. It had filled up with water over the winter. It had developed huge algae blooms, which we had to gather together by hand and dump on the side. It was quite the most horrid thing I've had to do in my archaeological career, but it was worth it in the end. And we were pumping constantly while we were excavating the stoking chamber here. Beyond it, as I said, the flue, and beyond it, the hypocaust of the hot bath. But in terms of engineering, this was really exciting. We had our run of water pipes. they lined up directly with this hole here. And this hole was basically a shaft which dropped alongside the outer wall and then emerged out here. So that shaft is behind that wall, communicating with this sort of arched niche here. This has got to be where the water comes in from the pipe, goes down, drops, increasing its velocity, and then presumably then siphons up again into the bathhouse and into the hot water boiler. The stone trough here with the hole in that side and the water-worn outlet just here, this was found in the base of the stoking chamber. It must be something to do with water supply, with water distribution within the bathhouse. So we've got the water, we've got the way the water enters the bathhouse. And if you read books on bathhouses and books on aqueducts and water supply, you'll find lots about both, but virtually nothing about how the water gets into the building. How the water's used in the building, yeah, lots of that. How the water's transported to the building, lots of that. But the bit in the middle, we actually got, and this is at least rare, so my reading suggests. Anybody who knows different would be very happy to hear. The other thing we've got is the heat. Of course, the two things you need in the bathhouse, water and heat. The other thing we've got is the heat. So the ringed area there is the flue. And in the flue, we have the stand on which the boiler would stand, steps to access the top of the hot water boiler, even a displaced voussoir from the furnace sitting on the arch step. And within the flue, we have iron fire bars. And these iron fire bars, you can see here, are very, very substantial indeed. They're just under 1 metre long. In square section, they are 15 centimetres square, and they are heavy as hell. We got one of them out. The other two are still there. What's really important to note, though, is this is a unique finding. Finding these fire bars in a bathhouse in situ is not only unique in Britain, it is unique in the Roman Empire. Apart from one bar, which is in situ, that's found in the 19th century in the Stabian baths in Pompeii. So we're on a first here. We're on a really unique discovery. The way this works, well, there's the fire bars there. Over the fire bars would be this thing called a testudo, which is a semi-cylindrical bronze or at least metal thing, which is closed at the end of the fire and open at that end. And what happens here is the hot bath, it's open to the hot bath in the hot room, and the water in the hot bath will circulate down the testudo and back again, circulate over the fire and keep your bathwater warm. Isn't that nice? Then you're not switching on the hot tap with your toes in this place. A very sophisticated setup, and there would also be a metal boiler over it. As I said, the discovery of these bars in situ is extremely rare. You can see the sort of Y shape that we have on these bars here. Bars have been found broken up in many other bathhouses in the Roman Empire, just broken up. What they were for, well, that was sort of pretty much determined, but they were not in situ. So this one in the Jewry Walls bathhouse at Leicester, you can see that Y shape on that one, which is like the one that we've got. The only one up here, the only one on Hadrian's Wall, at Corbridge, an iron bar made of iron blooms welded together. This is a 1909 X-ray of these blooms welded together, this one iron bar that was found standing upright in this furnace here, which is adjacent to a bathhouse. It suggests that these iron bars are actually manufactured on site next to the bathhouse. So somewhere we've got an iron furnace, maybe. Oop. And the flue there leads into the hypocaust, which would support the hot bath and the floor of the hot room. What you need for a building like this, or a structure like this, is you need infrastructure, particularly particularly, you need drainage infrastructure. And what we have under the floor of the stoking chamber is this drain, which is you can see how that wall has collapsed over the drain. It's a continuation of this very deep drain that's coming in from the north. So you've got the drain, which is taking out the water you don't want, the groundwater, the drainage water that you want out of your building so your stoking chamber stays dry, and then you've got the pipes bringing the water in that you do want. So you have two different treatments of water. By the time you get to the outside of the bathhouse, they will join up, and the wastewater and the wastewater from the bath would join up. But that surface there is Roman ground level. The bottom 7 courses of our 14-course high bathhouse are actually subterranean in the Roman period. And that's so you can stand there, stoke the bathhouse, and the floor of the bathhouse, the raised floor of the bathhouse, can be at the same level as the exterior ground surface. So this is really sophisticated in engineering terms. Where does the water come from? Well, the water's coming from the north. It is probably aqueduct supplied. In fact, to get the pressure up to those pipes, it has to be aqueduct supplied. So the next thing we've got to do is try and find the aqueduct. Well, there's a culvert in the stone wall at Birdoswald. Alan Whitworth, who's drawn every stone on Hadrian's Wall, says that it is actually unique on the line of the wall. It is similar to the culvert at Wall's End that supplies the bathhouse at Wall's End, also through the wall from the north. And this is probably the course of our aqueduct supply. And I've just mocked up where it is on the wall and where it is in relation to our area A. Finally, in terms of hydrology, we have to remember that Birdoswald is on a very peculiar site. Richmond identified what he called the Birdoswald morass, which was this great bog sunk in the bottom that was drained in order to install the fort. It's a sort of deep bog, and the fort is terraced upwards in 2 directions. Although it looks flat now, it's actually terraced up in 2 directions. So the collapse of the various buildings have allowed it to fill up to its current flat appearance. And the back wall of the Principia, that was also excavated in a slit trench by Ian Richmond, was recorded as 15 courses high. So that back wall of the headquarters building is as high as our bathhouse. Ian.
Thank you. So where do we go from here? One of the points that I would note is that we are a couple of years away from publication, because we have a great deal to do to actually understand these spaces further. And as Tony has intimated, really, we are beneficiaries of exceptional preservation and exceptional colleagues who worked to recover material in very difficult circumstances indeed. And many I would like to pay tribute here, but Matt Hobson there, who supervised the baths area on the right. And that information flow that is coming through is also in the best possible hands. Diana Bloomberg here, seen in action on one of the pieces that came from the baths, and part of the data set that we are pulling together. Now, it's important to note that this runs the gamut, really. There's been a lot of very exciting information coming through to us through the environmental, and I'll stay just briefly with the Bath complex. Tony's talked about those thick layers of deposits that formed around the bathhouse, consecutive dumping of charcoal and ash. The micromorphological study of that material has been intensely revealing, both in terms of understanding the human process, the sequential aspects of what's going on, but also in showing just what exemplary evidence we have for much larger reconstructions of how the landscape, how the environment is being exploited. So we benefit from a lot of wood charcoal. I'll say a bit more about that. and also great information on other aspects of the plant life and what's being dumped, what forms of material are being dumped, alongside the obvious clearance of material from the Pryfernium of the bath itself. So lots of information on fuel types, on different types of grasses that are finding their way into this area as well. A very impressive array of woods that are also finding their way into the hypercaust here. And a lot here that's showing what we can get out of micro CT scans of materials, so bundles of layered plant tissues, sometimes perhaps reed matting. Of course, reed matting would have been used in quite a number of the buildings, sometimes possibly roofing. Again, an early stage, but an exciting stage of work. So we have stories to tell in ash, and we have stories to tell also from stones. Now, we incorporated our comment on the stonework particularly in A, because it was in Trench A where a lot of stonework, again, quite hard to parallel within Roman Britain. We know roughly what it is, but a lot of specialist stonework to support hydraulic structures was recovered. Not by any means the only stonework we found. These two altars were stars of the show fairly early on when they came up, frustratingly, with the inscription really too eroded even for Roger Tomlin to make any sense of it. But a reminder of aspects of religiosity in the extramural settlement. Stories from sherds are also important. And here I refer back to what I think is one of the most interesting ceramic stories from the line of the wall, the observation that housesteads or Frisian ware was actually found only in one particular zone at this site. And it's very interesting that despite the work that Tony did south of the fort demonstrating the presence of this ceramic type convincingly there, no sherds of this pottery were discovered within the fort, and no sherds of this pottery type have been observed so far from any of the over 8,000 courseware sherds that we've catalogued outside of the fort. Now, Stories from Sherds also invites a throwback to an earlier, what for me at least was a highlight of the Birdoswald Time Team episode, where a very innocent Tony Robinson asked of Lindsay, I think, of one sherd, what are they doing when looking at an evocatively decorated sherd. This sherd was recovered relatively close to that one, and it did raise the question of whether scenes of a sexual nature were featuring strongly in the ceramic assemblage from one part. Unfortunately, Rob Collins can't join us this evening, but as a tribute, I thought it would be interesting to just reflect on this sherd and to note that I have it on good authority from one of our pottery specialists that this repeated motif is in fact a squid. Well, whatever it is, and this room is equipped with buzzers which would allow you to make your own verdict on the interpretation, it is worth noting that this is an extremely unusual Samian vessel form. So Birdoswald's ceramic assemblage contains quite a few surprises, and perhaps none quite so splendid as this recent addition. This is a snake pot with a difference. Snake pots, or vessels with applique animals, are well known from cultic circles. This one has an animal and a human face. One or two might note the entirely misleading similarity to the serpent stone of Maryport, but I don't think there's a particular connection there. Where did this exotic, fascinating sherd come from? It came from north of the Wool, from the ever-generous Trench D, which kept throwing up exciting and surprising varieties of material. Motto, keep remembering that there's important stuff going on north of the Wool too. The finds in their rich variety include things that we might reasonably expect in a Roman military context, and also, of course, that we need to be remembering that these are outside of the fort. Obviously, militaria is to be found outside of the fort. A range of military equipment found in the houses, outside of the fort walls. Conservation work is ongoing, a splendid array of seal boxes, lead seals you can see, brooches, hairpins, a wide array of artefacts. It'd be wonderful when we're able to complete fully zoning this material, but we have to remember, of course, that there are some very complex aspects of redeposition involved in many of these cases. The work goes on. Now, what though does the overall picture start to suggest to us? Well, when Tony and I started this excavation, one of the things I think we can admit to having hoped was we would find that the general narrative of extramural settlements becoming or being abandoned in the late 3rd century might actually fall apart if we looked at a large enough area and a diverse enough array of structures. We've looked at that now, and we'd have to say that that narrative actually remains robustly true. That what we're seeing here is that overwhelmingly these structures outside the fort, north, east, west, they're all coming to an end in terms of occupation in the late 3rd century. So that's an extremely important point. And we can see some of this, particularly with the bathhouse, coming, of course, under very sophisticated levels of control, considerable investment to bring things to an end. So that is our brief story so far. We are aiming for publication in 2026, and we will have, I'm sure, another story to tell then. So for the moment, it remains for us to thank the team. Thank you for listening, and it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him. Good night.
Okay.